of you people around the bar, make your way this way, please. Welcome back. People have good experiences in the tracks, or do people take the afternoon off? Yeah. I spent most of mine in the global track, which I was disappointed in the overall turnout, but the quality of the presentation and the discussion was truly fantastic. So I hope you all had a similar experience in whichever track you chose. As we committed earlier today, we're going to close out this afternoon in the next 35 minutes with a really powerful panel conversation. The broad subject of mental health, it is in fact a part of the series that MPR, an initiative, that MPR has developed called Call to Mind. Some of you are likely already familiar with it. If this is your introduction to it, we're thrilled to be partners with MPR and bring this to you. I'm really pleased to introduce, to set it up, and to bring out the panel, the leader of the Call to Mind initiative at MPR, Babette Apland. Please welcome her.
Everybody. It's great to see you here and coming at the end of the day for this presentation. I'm Babette Apland, and I lead Call to Mind, American Public Media and MPR's initiative to foster new conversations about mental health. This is an exciting time for mental health. More and more people are talking about it, caring about it, and curious to learn more about it. We are changing the way that we address and relate to mental health. Mental health and well-being is an important aspect of all of our lives. We all experience varying levels of mental health throughout our lifetime. And according to the CDC, 50% of us have or will experience a mental health condition in our lifetime. And we know that early treatment, early intervention is important to preventing a mental health condition from becoming chronic or a lifetime condition. And yet, people on average wait 10 years to receive treatment, and then only 50% of people do. Contributing factors include misunderstanding, discrimination, lack of access, and a workforce shortage. And all of this accumulates to a huge economic impact. The combined costs of mental health care, disability, and lost productivity exceed $400 billion a year. So against this backdrop of challenges, our mental health care system is struggling. And too often it fails to meet the needs of people who need help. At the same time, we are seeing a burst of digital innovation that has the potential to transform the way we provide mental health care, and most importantly, to help people who are struggling with a mental health condition. So I'm really excited about this panel and to delve into the investments that entrepreneurs have made in mental health, the science behind their products, and the opportunities and barriers they face as they're offering these new solutions to the marketplace. So now it is my pleasure to introduce Chris Farrell.
Thank you.
Yeah. Many of you know Chris. He is a senior economics contributor at Marketplace, APM's nationally syndicated public radio program. He's economics commentator for MPR and host of its series, Conversations on Creative Economy. An award-winning journalist, Chris's most recent book is Unretirement: How Baby Boomers Are Changing the Way We Think About Work, Community, and the Good Life. Again, please join me in welcoming Chris Farrell.
Well, thank you, and thank you for being here. This is wonderful. And are the guests coming out? Here they come. There we go. So, just so you know, this is going to be for broadcast, and it's not church, it's not temple. You want to laugh, you want to groan, you want to applaud. We love it. The only thing you want to tweet, you want to put on Instagram, wonderful stuff. The only thing we ask is that you turn off the ringer on your cell phone. And the reason is that this is for broadcast. And so, you know, when you're in your car and you're driving and you're listening to it, for some reason, the ringer just really stands out. But that's the only thing we ask. And the other thing is I'm going to do a formal introduction. And then twice I'll do sort of reintroduce our guests. And that's for the benefit of the radio audience. So now I think we'll go to the formal introduction and we'll start our conversation. Hello and welcome to Call to Mind, Entrepreneurs Tackle Mental Health and Well-Being. This broadcast is part of Minnesota Public Radio's mental health initiative, Call to Mind. We're at the MANOVA Summit, a global gathering at the Minneapolis Convention Center on the future of health and healthcare. I'm Chris Farrell with Minnesota Public Radio. Mental health is critical to our overall health, our sense of well-being, and our engagement in our community. The Center for Disease Control reports that half of us will experience at least one episode of mental illness in our lifetime. 1 in 5 adults experience a mental health condition each year. Our mental health care system is struggling to meet demand. The discrimination stigma surrounding mental health is strong. My guests today are 3 high-tech entrepreneurs reimagining how to provide mental health support. Dale Cook is co-founder and chief executive officer of Learn to Live. Aneela Idnani Kumar is co-founder and president of HabitAware. Grady is CEO of Nightware. Welcome. So let's dive right in, and what we'll do is we'll just start to my right, and then we'll move, continuing on to the right. And what I'd like each of you to do is give us a brief introduction to your business, the elevator speech, but since this is public radio, the elevator speech plus.
Sounds great. I think that's my cue.
So first is Dale Cook.
Well, thank you. Thank you to everyone for being a part of this. Thank you for having us on. Learn to Live really was put together about 4.5 years ago in response to one of the things you've already noted, which is to say that, as many of us know, almost half the people in the United States will suffer from a mental health problem at some point in their lives. But unfortunately, for those that are suffering, realistically, only 1 in 4 will seek out traditional face-to-face therapy. So the 75% who don't do that are really prevented from doing so by 3 reasons. Social stigma is typically number 1, access is number 2, and cost is number 3. So Learn to Live offers online programs based on the proven fundamentals of cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, to really address that. So the idea is to extend the reach of mental health into people's homes and into places where we can befriend them and they can access clinically proven programs for problems such as depression, stress, anxiety, worry, social anxiety, and insomnia. And we can reach them and we can address those barriers of social stigma because it's private, it's confidential, it's 24/7. For those same reasons, we can get over the access barrier. And then in many cases, we can address the cost by partnering with health plans, with higher education institutions, or with employers who really end up covering that cost in partnership with us so that we can offer our programs and our services at no cost to them.
Okay. Aneela?
Our company is called HabitAware, and we make a smart bracelet that helps people become aware of subconscious disorders that are at their core mental health issues. So things like hair pulling, skin picking, and nail biting. And I personally am a hair puller of 20 years. I started pulling in my early teens as a coping mechanism for stress and anxiety, and started around the time my father fell sick with cancer. So for myself, that stigma and that shame, I had a lot of inner stigma, if you will, inner shame. I didn't want to share it with anyone. And a couple of years ago, my husband caught me without eyebrows, and I finally shared my hair pulling secret, along with a desire for something that made me aware of the issue so that I could take steps to take control. And that's what we built. We built a smart bracelet that uses gesture detection technology to look for that scanning motion that a person may do. So maybe if you're a skin picker, that's looking for skin imperfections on your back or on your face. And then the bracelet sends a vibration that is meant to bring you to awareness so that you can now actually make a choice and choose to do something more healthy. And so we've brought this to market to help the millions of people suffering from this issue in silence, as we've said, because of that stigma, because of that disbelief that, oh, why can't you just stop? So we're trying to help change that conversation.
And Grady, with Nightware?
Nightware is a digital therapeutic that treats nightmare disorder, often comorbid with PTSD. Nightware is a software application that runs on the Apple Watch. And utilizing sensors on the watch, we monitor a person's sleep and create a profile of their sleep utilizing machine learning. At that point, we can detect anomalies consistent with a nightmare, and we then intervene to arouse them out of the nightmare without waking them. Sleep nightmare disorder, independent of any other mental health variable, increases a person's incidence of suicidal behavior by 5x. And so by treating this key part of people's lives, we are able to affect their anxiety and depression symptoms. And we're in a randomized clinical trial at the Minneapolis and St. Cloud VA to bear that out. We're in FDA pre-submission as a regulated device.
So the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, right?
Yes, the Food and Drug Administration as a Class 2 medical device, meaning we are to receive a de novo designation, which means there is no previous treatment of this type, and it is a new category of treatment.
And Aneela, are you going for FDA or you're direct to consumer?
Yeah, so right now we are direct to consumer for people suffering from hair pulling, skin picking, nail biting. These mental health disorders, because of that shame, a lot of people are not going to a mental health professional for treatment. So for us, it just made sense to go direct to consumer. Our very first test market was the annual conference for these disorders. And the doctors there and the families there, the parents and the children and adults who have this disorder, their eyes just lit up as this could be a tool for them. So we haven't gone down the path yet. That being said, we were recently awarded an NIH SBIR grant this summer to now improve our algorithm and prove efficacy and get on that path of clinical validation. So that's our next step.
And so as I understand with Learn to Live, you started out direct to consumer, but now you've shifted, or at least you've added to your market, like the University of Minnesota and employers. What accounts for the change?
The pivot, if you will, was always something that was part of our plan. And so when we started Learn to Live, we recognized that, one of the questions is always, who pays for healthcare? And mental health is very tricky that way too. And so we always recognized that ultimately probably we could find the most growth as a company in the business-to-business space in terms of who our paying clients are, if you will. But we also recognize, when we talk about consumers taking control of their health care, and I suspect that will come up here in mental health, that consumers really drive a lot of those decisions, and we needed to make sure that we could identify these silent sufferers, as Aneela mentioned, online, and learn how to befriend them, learn how to keep them engaged in our programs long enough to see meaningful clinical outcomes. And that by doing that successfully, if we did that long enough, then we felt like we had something that we could take to organizations. And so that's why for the first 12 to 14 months of our company's life, we were direct to consumer because we wanted to figure that out. And so we still offer that. We still go direct to consumer, but really a lot of that focus is working with organizations.
And so on colleges and universities, what kind of feedback are you getting from the students?
It's we feel very fortunate. It's been very positive. You mentioned the University of Minnesota, so we're beginning our second year of partnership with them, and we're when I say fortunate to see high engagement, that's a double-edged sword because we want people using our programs. We want people, as I'm sure Aneela and Grady do too. But it also means that people are suffering. But the feedback's been very positive. I think generally, for example, with our higher education clients, we see even in year one, anywhere from 10 to 25% of the student body in 1 year will either take our comprehensive assessment and or enroll in a program. And so I think that speaks to, in large part, unfortunately, the demand for that kind of different, kind of consumer-focused solution in mental health. And we'd like to think we're doing some things right as well, but I think, at the same time, there's the need. And that's really the genesis for how we started.
And Grady, as I understand it, your founder, who's now your Chief Technology Officer, is that correct? That part of this came all about because his father was dealing with PTSD.
Right, so our founder, Tyler Sklizachik, was at a VA event focused on utilizing mobile technology to help veterans. And at that time, Dr. Cody Rawl, who was at that time a resident at Walter Reed, casually mentioned the high incidence of nightmare disorder that he was dealing with the PTSD patients he was seeing. And Tyler's father had returned from Iraq with nightmare disorder and had gone to the VA multiple times to have sleep studies where he did not have nightmares, and so his results were deemed inconclusive, and that's a key point that maybe we can touch on later. Tyler then went on to pursue his PhD at University of Chicago, and while he's still a trusted member of our family, we've brought on an additional CTO, Randy Milbert.
So how does the product work?
So Nightware utilizes sensors on the watch, and utilizing machine learning, we create a profile of a person's sleep. And then we can detect anomalies consistent with a nightmare and intervene using vibrotactile feedback, similar to how HabitAware is making people conscious of their daytime habits. We're intervening directly in a person's sleep to arouse them out of the nightmare without awakening them. And so in the cases that we're dealing with, people are having, let's say they start at 1 nightmare a week, but in many cases people are having 5 to 15 nightmares a night. And in the cases of PTSD, they're often reliving the worst experience of their life. So they wake up with dysphoria, which means an off emotional feeling. They start their day in a kind of a depressed state, anxious state. And so by treating their sleep, we're really able to affect their entire lives, because practitioners utilizing evidence-based therapies or prescribing medications, they're only able to deal with the symptoms and the behaviors as they manifest in the visit. They don't have the benefit of monitoring and treating a person's sleep. And so while they may prescribe off-label medications to treat symptoms of nightmare disorder, they have no means of intervening in the nightmares themselves. And so what we're pursuing is the potential opportunity, as I think you are with HabitAware, to alter people's core brain function, where potentially with 3 to 5 years of use, we could remove the nightmares completely.
And so you're doing the test with the VA, and it's important to get to with the FDA, but is your market much bigger than veterans, or is that where you're going to focus on?
So our entry point is veterans, but only 20% of PTSD diagnoses in the US are veterans. It's approximately, depending on the analysis, it's 3 to 5% of the population. There are 1.3 million annual diagnoses of nightmare disorder in the US, and we think that the number is much higher. I can't see the audience, but raise your hand if you've ever had a primary care physician ask you if you have nightmares. It's very rare. It's really kind of hiding in plain sight. And so for us, we're starting with the veteran population because the mental health care professionals at the VA are heavily concentrated around treating PTSD. There's the veteran suicide rate, which people really, it enters the same type of pathos as the opiate crisis, right? Where these people have given of themselves for our country, and yet they're in a mental health state where they choose to end their lives. And so we believe that through just the experiences we've had thus far, we're working with a focus group, and there was, and once again, I'm not trying to make a medical claim. This is anecdotal evidence based on a focus group with which we've worked with for over a year. There was a gentleman on suicide watch who was able to utilize Nightware, and within 2 days, the people providing care to him were able to downgrade his chances of suicidality. So it's had a very profound effect in multiple cases, and what we're hoping to bear out with the randomized clinical trial, because within our focus group, the effect size has been enormous, and so we need to quantify the placebo effect of knowing that somebody's monitoring your sleep, intervening and having that confidence, but also really quantifying the effect size and the types of outcomes that we can drive.
So Aneela, how many habits can your app help out with?
Yeah, so we're very focused on these body-focused repetitive behaviors. That's the umbrella term for this mental health condition. So that's hair pulling, skin picking, nail biting. The bracelet itself can train up to 4 gestures at any given time. The idea, though, is to start with one, to start learning how Keen works in terms of its gesture detection.
And Keen is?
Keen is our smart bracelet.
The smart bracelet, yes.
How the bracelet works, but more importantly, why you were doing this behavior. What is the underlying trigger, whether it's stress, anxiety, sleep, boredom, trauma, so that you can start recognizing when it's happening, why it's happening, how it's happening, and start using that information to actually affect change in the right way. So for example, for 20 years, I didn't realize that my biggest issue with hair pulling was late at night, and I'm a night owl, and I would stay up late reading books, and then once the computer came around, AOL Instant Messenger as a kid, and up till 2, 3, 4 in the morning, pulling and chatting with strangers. Sounds a little weird. But, you know, that late at night stress, that late at night, and then going into the workforce, again, late at night working, stress, anxiety, pull. Now, I finally have the data to show me, hey, this is your worst time period. And now I just go to sleep. The work is there in the morning, and so are my eyebrows. And so having this access to this information, this data, actually helps the person understand why, and it helps change the conversation for families as well, from did you pull today for a parent and child, to hey, let's check your Keen stats today. Let's see what was going on. Tell me what was happening at school at, 2:45 p.m. So now you can start talking and start understanding and start supporting one another instead of coming at it from a place of guilt and shame.
And Neil, I understand that you got involved in this because of your brother-in-law and behavioral cognitive therapy. And first I'm going to ask you to define behavioral cognitive therapy. And then how'd your brother-in-law get you involved?
Yeah, you've done good research. Yeah, so my co-founder's Dr. Russ Morfitt, who's my brother-in-law. And kind of the genesis of that is I was in business school, and so I'm not a psychologist, and he was visiting in town where I was in school, and at a psychologist convention, he said, I have this idea, and it's actually not new. It's been around for 15 years. This, at the time, computer-based cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, is actually really effective. It's as effective as face-to-face therapy for low degrees of suffering, simple forms, low complexity mental health problems. And so he asked me if I wouldn't mind kind of vetting it in business school to see if there was a way to scale it, because he said I'm not a business person, and so looked into it and determined, yeah, we could, Russ, you could do this. And he said, well, would you like to do it with me? So I said, sure, I'll do my very best. So that's really how it started. Yeah.
And Aneela, I understand you and your husband ended up in China as part of the development of the product. So how did this come about?
Yeah, so HACS is a hardware accelerator program. Their managing director was here in Minnesota doing an event for the IoT Fuse meetup group here. And so Samir and our co-founder, John, who's our lead hardware engineer, they met with him after that event and basically pitched him our idea. And they said, apply. We got in, and we're like, okay, yeah, we're not going to China. Like, we're not picking up our son and doing this. This sounds crazy. But we spoke to another Minnesota-based company here who went through the program, and they said, if you get into HACS, you go to HACS. So we founded a daycare in China that spoke English. We enrolled our son, and we worked in China. And the whole point was to basically be in Shenzhen, which is the electronics manufacturing capital of the world. So John was able to source all of the components for the hardware that we were building just literally right across the street from where the HACS offices were in the markets, and we were able to just move a whole lot faster. It truly is an accelerator program in that way to get us to market a year later.
Grady, how did you get involved with Nightware?
I learned at Tyler, and I just fell in love with what he was doing. Having spent 15 years in Silicon Valley, I just instantly associated with what he was doing and utilizing technology to make people's lives better. And to Aneela's earlier point in regards to HabitAware, right? It's utilizing wearable technology to make someone aware of their own behaviors. And that's a very appropriate use of technology for mental health. And there are many out there. There are hundreds of millions of dollars being invested in digital therapeutics for mental health. And established psychotherapy is fantastic for many applications. And as Dale described, there's a supply problem in many cases, and there's also overcoming stigmas and things of that nature. So utilizing digital technology to augment what's already in place and really mental health professionals, it's a phenomenological exercise. So what they're doing is they're observing a person's behavior, and then they're asking a person about their lives and about their internal dialogue, if you will. And so by augmenting what mental health professionals are already able to do with off-the-shelf technology that is able to provide biometric data, is able to provide interventions in the case of HabitAware and Nightware, and in the case of Learn to Live, being able to augment a practitioner's ability to do psychotherapy. It's really broadening the number of people that can get mental health care and provide mental health care, and potentially making the entire ecosystem more healthy. And so I think to speak about what we're doing in context of what's already in place, because there are so many professionals doing great work across the board, and they all want to do more. So how do we get the data and get the outcomes necessary so that they feel comfortable prescribing and recommending? So I really feel that in the case of Tyler, I saw what he was doing, and I said, I see something there, and I started to work with him and network with device and mental health professionals here in the Twin Cities area. And then we really started to get some momentum early last year.
I totally agree with Grady. It's not about, taking the customer away from a treatment professional, if you will. It's about embracing technology so that they can do their job better. So that power of awareness that we're both creating is now enabling someone to use the tools that they're taught from their treatment professional. You can't change what you don't know is happening, but now, if you are aware, you can use that breathing exercise. You can use that, put the thought in the vault tactic, whatever it may be that your treatment professional is trying to impart on you. We have more than 400 professionals recommending our product, and some of them are starting to integrate it into their treatment, and that's without that clinical validation because they know that it's helping. And that's what we need. We need to just start helping people and get off this, all the red tape. If it's working, it's working.
Well, Dale, what is your experience? I mean, substitute, adversary, complement? I mean, how do you, in terms of how professionals look at Learn to Live?
I would say overall really complementary. And in fact, I'm happy to jump in on this too, because I think, the complementary nature of what we're trying to do up here, speaks to Aneela's point. I think to Grady's point about being a part of an ecosystem is an important point to make. We have found, for example, the traditional face-to-face, mental health treatment community to be very friendly and open and not hostile to what we're doing. I think for a few reasons. One is that we seek to provide these programs and activities that really can complement what they're doing. So we can be an appropriate first-line intervention in some cases, which helps them with their trying to meet the high demand issue. So we're not competing, but also we can be complementary to what they're doing. So in the case of the University of Minnesota, we can have students who bring activities from our programs from their phones into a counseling center to say, hey, I started the social anxiety thing. I really didn't think, kind of face-to-face therapy was for me, but I think I'm ready to have this conversation. And by the way, I'm doing this homework with Learn to Live. Can we talk about it? And then we hear back from the counselor or the psychiatrist saying, hey, isn't this great? they're already 3 steps in because they started kind of in an easier digital format.
My guests today are Dale Cook, co-founder of Learn to Live, Aneela Idnani Kumar, co-founder of HabitAware, and Grady Hanna, CEO of Nightware. I'm Chris Farrell with Minnesota Public Radio. We're at the Minneapolis Convention Center with MPR's mental health initiative, Call to Mind. Aneela, congratulations. You were the grand prize winner, your company a grand prize winner of the Minnesota Cup. And so that portion of it comes with $50,000. I want to shift to capital. So how have you raised your money?
We have raised through friends and family and a few angel investors, and Hacks was one of our early investors, and we've recently received an infusion from Backstage Capital, which is led by Arlen Hamilton, who focuses solely on funding diverse founders. So we've been very capital efficient with the funding we've raised to date, and we are looking for a seed round right now.
And how do you make your money?
So we make money just simply selling the bracelet direct to consumer. So right now it's just that one-time purchase off of our website.
Grady?
So through Medical Alley, I was introduced to our lead investor, and he had recently sold a company, and he had a group of investors that trusted him that we were able to bring along. And additionally, Nightware has received a grant from the Minnesota Department of Veterans Affairs Support Our Troops program. So the people that get their veteran endorsement on their license plates, that goes into a fund that is through a RFP process, is provided by the Support Our Troops program. So we're very thankful to the Department of Veterans Affairs and the Support Our Troops program. And as we're getting further into our partnership with the Minneapolis and St. Cloud VA and our regulatory feedback from the Food and Drug Administration, we are now raising money to fund our randomized clinical trial, as well as some of our pre-market activities, such as regulatory work and kind of pre-market work with key opinion leaders in the mental health space, both within the VA as well as private provider networks and Medicaid.
And how will Nightware make its money?
So Nightware will be reimbursed through VA, DOD, and private payers.
Okay.
Reimbursed as a medical benefit. So will be prescribed and fulfilled in the case of the VA through prosthetics departments, which are on site at every major VA. They provide everything from custom prosthetics to durable medical goods to hearing aids and things of that nature. And then through private payers, we would be prescribed just as you would a pharmaceutical. Our premise is that if you put on a blindfold and you looked at this outcome and you said, we're able to reduce these symptoms and we're able to have these minimal side effects, and we're able to get someone to this quality of life and quality of care, and potentially reduce their costs of care, that is to be valued and reimbursed just as it would any other pharmaceutical or device.
And Dale, you started out with individual investors?
We did, yep. We started with individual angels, and Aneela and I were talking about it before the program. Kind of did the traditional rolling raise with individual angels, and we were fortunate we're alum of the Minnesota Cup program as well, which is fantastic, and Medical Alley's been really helpful. But then we did move into like a traditional seed round, and then earlier this year, we closed our Series A round of funding.
And then Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota took a stake in the company?
That's right, yep, they led our Series A round, that's right.
And so when you have an institutional investor like that, how does that change? Does that change the nature of, does that affect you?
You know, I would say it certainly does, and I would say for us it's an unequivocal positive answer. You know, I think, entrepreneurs have that conversation a lot about strategic investment. You know, do we go healthcare, venture capital, do we do angel? You know, what are the different funding mechanisms that could be most helpful for us, for growth. And admittedly, there are mixed reviews on strategic investments, but we've experienced a really positive relationship with Blue Cross. They actually participated in our seed round as well. So we have a 2.5-year relationship now with them. And it's been, I think, a true spirit of innovation. I think they've been open to pushing the envelope in the ways that we're trying to move really quickly as a healthcare startup. And we've learned a lot from them, from their data capabilities, their go-to-market capabilities, the way they can grow. All of that experience comes to bear on the way we think about sort of the healthcare business side of growth, and it's been very good for us.
So is there, in Minnesota, is there a mental health business ecosystem like there is in med tech? I mean, think Medtronics, right? And then all the businesses that have been built around that and their competitors. What about in the mental health area, Aneela?
I mean, I think we're on the cusp of that. We're starting to, the three of us sitting here right now, there's Recovery, which is a peer support app for people with substance abuse that's just launched this year. There's a number of different things happening here, and I think as we get together and can start, trading secrets and working together, we can build that med tech, mental health tech, digital health tech, and hopefully make Minnesota another flag in the ground for us for that.
So do you think I was looking at some national figures, and it was with venture capital and in mental health, it was about $800 million this year, and that's triple what it was last year. So $800 million, that's a decent sum of money. It's not that much, but triple last year. Is something going on in the market that you're feeling a sense that there's more investors interested in mental health? Grady?
Well, and I think to your earlier question to Aneela, if you look at all the device companies and their work in neuromodulation, utilizing these types of mechanisms for augmentation of treatment, whether or not people are directly working in a given mental health field, there is just such a huge ecosystem of expertise, people that have built companies where they're taking so much risk. They're in for tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars pre-market, and they've got provider partners right there with them. And so the willpower and the steely resolve of Minnesotans has really come through. And so in the case of Nightware, we've greatly benefited from that in many different ways. As far as access to capital, having spent 15 years in San Francisco, I've been in contact with investors, and I can say that they don't blink an eye when I say that we're in Minnesota and we're not interested in moving to the coast, that they understand that there's this run on talent on the coasts. And so the costs of acquiring talent and recruiting people and the competition for talent and the lack of expertise in regulated industries has really come to bear, right? There's going to be your top players out of Stanford and places like that. But in terms of the breadth of capability here, there's been so much talk this week about Mayo, and it's for good reason, right? There are just so many fantastic institutions that we're able to benefit from. And so while there isn't the huge amount of capital sources here that you would find on the coast, it's never been easier for a Minnesota company to raise money and build a team here and not have to move to another geography.
And so one of my puzzlements is there are a lot of apps that are growing, that are out there. So how does the consumer figure out which app has, a scientific basis to it, that this is well thought through, as opposed to a gimmick, right? Because there are plenty of gimmicks that also get created. So how does the consumer sort through this product sphere as it grows?
Yeah.
I think, admittedly, it's a very good question to be asking. What we have found, and I'm very interested in Aneela and Grady's take too, is that, consumers every day, are becoming more and more sophisticated with, the way they access information, the way they do their research. And so, we have found that, we provide as much information as we can for those who are looking for, judging us on the usability, the user experience and the user interface, and, are there little prompts I can get in my day-to-day life? Does it integrate well in my life, which is kind of on the experience side? But there are certainly those that look deep, at the clinical side. And so we strive to provide both types of access to information and experience so that, when our sophisticated consumers are looking across the array of apps, they know what we are, and I think also by distinction they know what we're not. And so we're not going to be the right place for everybody. But I think that access to information and make it very easy for them to see that quickly, to make decisions. Well, am I going to go deeper here and look at these white papers, or am I not? I think is really important.
For us, we benefit from this body-focused repetitive behavior community being fairly close-knit. So they're in online support groups, sharing information, sharing what's working, whether it's, the Keen bracelet or another replacement strategy. And so for us, we've been benefiting simply from the results that we've been able to create, and people sharing their good experience with the product in building their awareness, heightening that knowledge of where their hands are so that they can make change.
And what about with the professional community?
The same exact thing. The first step of cognitive behavioral therapy is awareness, and that's exactly what we're providing. And that's why so many psychologists are on board with what we're doing, because, like I said before, now their patients are doing that homework, and that session is just so much more impactful because they can talk about what's really wrong, what's really happening. Everyone needs to learn cognitive behavioral therapy, not just people with mental health issues. This is life. Like, if you can teach a child cognitive behavioral therapy at that young age and dialectical behavioral therapy strategies at these
dialectical
behavioral therapy, and maybe Dale, you may know a little bit more, but there's 4 components, and I don't know enough about it, but it's really just starting to understand what's going on in the mind, and there's different. It's more directed to bipolar disorder.
Okay.
But these core competencies, it's things like gratitude, mindfulness, all of these things are elements and tools that everyone should be learning, so that you can go and take on any challenge in life. It's not just a mental health adversity. Someone in your life is gonna die, or you're gonna get into a car accident, or you're gonna lose your job. Something is gonna happen that's going to make you flip that switch. And if you can grow up learning these strategies, when that something happens, it'll be a flicker instead of the lights flashing.
So, Grady, there you can just really see the promise of what all 3 of you are talking about. But what is the limits?
Well, I think that's to be determined. I believe that digital mental health tools will become the most prolific category of mental health treatment because of the ubiquity of data. Once again, a practitioner who's in an intensive therapy can only get covered for 10 to 12 sessions. So at best, that's 10 to 12 hours with a person over the span of a couple of months. And so if they're able to benefit from that data, who knows where this can go? And so in our case, we want to focus very specifically on the mental health disease state of nightmare disorder, and treat that well, and work within the context of how psychiatrists are prescribing and how people are looking at this from a clinical perspective. Once we gain that beachhead, there are multiple opportunities for us to treat additional disease states. In fact, within our focus group, a veteran prescribed with severe PTSD is utilizing Nightware for daytime anxiety disorder. So utilizing the sensors on the watch, setting their threshold to make them aware of daytime anxiety disorder. And so, once again, we want to focus deeply on proving that we have a efficacy for this disease state, but we see multiple opportunities. And to your point about consumer applications, there are hundreds of sleep apps out there, and they're very limited in what claims they can make, and they're limited in where they can go from a professional medical perspective in terms of coverage. And so for us, we want to once again bring that burden of data to the practitioner so they can prescribe with one caveat, and I want to commend both of your companies, because I attended a digital therapeutics conference last week where there are people raising tens of millions of dollars, running multiple randomized clinical trials and targeting huge reimbursement target prices. That's necessitated by the amount of money they're raising, $70 million, $20, $30 million.
So this would be from health insurance companies, Medicare, Medicaid.
Right, and where both of your companies are at a price point, at an entry point, where you can play to both those payer systems as well as direct to consumer. And especially in the case of HabitAware, you've just been able to do, hardware is so difficult, and being able to get to market with a hardware device that is helping so many people is a very Minnesota story, in my opinion. Somebody who pragmatically wanted to solve a problem, and they figured out how to get to market on minimal capital.
So, Dale, what are you watching? I mean, what do you feel is, the frontier in this sort of digital space, mobile app, software? What are you paying attention to? What do you think, where do you see this going?
Well, I mean, certainly the first thing I would suggest is that there's an interesting convergence, and it's convenient that we're all together for this particular panel, because I think for, the three of us represent three very specific ways that are quickly becoming proven ways to address the very complex, highly pervasive problem of mental health. And so I would suggest that we're going to continue to see more and more wearable tracking devices, app-based programs like ours that do a lot of check-ins during the day, that are also web-based, that tackle very specific issues, that also then learn to connect to a bigger ecosystem. And that's one thing, to Aneela's point, that I think is exciting even about here in Minnesota, is that here the three of us sit with complementary offerings. And also, I think, to Grady's point earlier, I think one of the things that will prove itself out over time is those with the real outcomes, those that have great capital efficiency, those that have, when we're on the West Coast, we're fortunate to hear, I think at first I didn't know how to take it, and now I see it as a compliment when they'd say, you have great bone structure, with your company, you've done a lot with a little, and I've learned to really take that as a compliment.
Do they pat you on the head, or?
It feels like they're sitting higher and I'm sitting, But I think there's, the reality of that is, we've been very focused on outcomes, and we've grown over time to really make sure that as we scale, that we keep our outcomes in a very specific place, and consumers know that. They're very sophisticated, and the organizations we partner with know that as well. And so I think the proven apps are, apps or wearables will be the ones that stand up and then link to other points of care in the ecosystem.
So looking out at the next 5 years, 5-year plan, what is the growth strategy, Aneela?
For us, our goal is to start looking at how we can adapt Keen's technology to help with other mental health conditions. So we're starting on that path. And to your point earlier about, digital innovation, some of the issues that we have today are because of these devices that we carry around. So it's kind of a natural fit that we will use technology to solve it as well. So it's going to be exciting to see where we go in the next 5 years, where Learn to Live goes, where Nightware goes, where all of these different innovations come from, and how we adapt and change to help people as their problems adapt and change. Because we're, to your point earlier, why are VCs investing in this now? Well, it's because of things like Call to Mind, where people are talking about these things now, and the problem is now at the surface. And now is the time to invest in these solutions so that we can then solve those. And I'm sure new problems will arise for us to attack next.
It's human beings.
Yep.
So, Grady, you were talking about reimbursement. You're dealing with the VA. Once you get into the world of Medicaid, Medicare, a lot of rules, a lot of regulations. How hard is it to make your way in that world?
Actually, Medicaid and VA have a long history of working together in a complementary fashion, and those are really, in the case of the VA, it's a single-payer system, right? So it's got a $78 billion annual budget focused on providing care to our 22 million veterans. And once you've been able to establish that reimbursement pathway, there's a very well understood correlation between VA and Medicaid. Now, not to say there won't be difficulties, and we've been very fortunate to have a top regulatory expert work with us on these types of issues, but those are the two areas where we actually see the clearest path, is with the VA and Medicaid. And then in the terms of private payers, it's really about doing a health economics analysis. The fact is that only 20% of veterans are diagnosed with PTSD annually. Only 20% of PTSD diagnoses annually are veterans. So the rest of those people are victims of sexual assault, violence. It's comorbid, PTSD is comorbid with other issues. And so private payers are already paying for these people, not necessarily in the code associated with PTSD, but in all the other costs of care. And so we believe that we can provide a cost savings to private payers, but they're not going to take our word for it. We've got to take the well-worn path that every other company has done, frankly, to much greater expense in the case of devices and pharma. Estimates what does it cost to get a new drug to market? Some people estimate it's up to $1 billion, right? We're nowhere near that. So when it comes to things like regulatory and reimbursement requirements, we've got to work with the historical precedent. And once again, it's on us to provide the compelling data and the compelling patient stories in order to get payers to that point.
And Gail, what about employers? Now, are you seeing employers more receptive to your product? Is that an area where you're expanding into?
Employers make up a meaningful portion of our client base, for sure. They're generally fine, especially think of Minnesota and the General Mills and some of the other, companies here that are, as we've even heard at this conference, that are so progressive and they're so open to things that certainly many employers, find the funding. We seek to provide a pretty modest price point to make it attractive, and also we can scale from a digital point of view. So certainly employers are getting on board, and we're exploring Medicaid, Medicare as well. But we find our organizations, universities, as well, even health plans for their fully insured side are very open to investing in this area.
So, Aneela, how big do you think this mental health tech market can get?
Well, you yourself said 1 in 5 people is going to have some mental health disorder. So numbers-wise, I cannot tell you, but obviously if that many people are going to be affected by this, then we need to start making changes either in how we are living life and how we are treating each other, or on the flip side, how to get people better from that.
And there's no reason, looking at all three of you, that your products and services could not be global.
No.
We're already in 25 countries with customers using our device.
So each of you is involved in a career, a business that is making a difference to individuals, to society. So someone in the audience, someone listening to this broadcast, they have an idea. They're thinking about this, but they're nervous about making the leap, right? There's a lot of difficulty starting a company. So what would you recommend for them to think through? What are some practical things to think through if you want to enter the mental health entrepreneurship space?
Well, the first thing I would say, and I know it's easier said than done, but make the leap. Don't be afraid to take action, take some steps, And for some, making the leap isn't, quit your job tomorrow and then tell your family 2 days later and try to raise some capital. But, I think, certainly you need to think through, like in the case of mental health, where do we fit? It's as we've said, a a big problem, there's many shades of problems, and there's arguably many shades of solutions. So I would challenge people to think through, well, where do you think you fit in that? And then certainly, if you're going to scale or if you're going to raise capital, depending on your model, you need to think through how, what are the economics of that? And I would say, certainly for Learn to Live's journey, mentorship is invaluable. So, go speak with the people that have gone before you, especially if you can find, certainly healthcare, but healthcare in mental health even better. Take advantage of some of these tremendous programs, Minnesota Cup, as Aneela has done, as we did, Medical Alley, all these organizations, even here in Minnesota, that have tremendous experience to offer you. Certainly do your homework, I would say, before you really take the lead.
And Aneela, you must have thought about this, because it's exciting. It's a wonderful story moving your family to China, but I'm sure at the moment it wasn't easy.
Yeah, it's always, what are we doing? Are we sure about this? If you have an idea, I think the first and foremost is to write it down and, what is that problem you're trying to solve? What is that solution? Who are you making this for? Like, keep that customer, if you will, in the top of your mind always, because that's what keeps you going, knowing who you are making it for. I also, when people have startup ideas, whether it's in digital health, mental health, or just anything, there's that fear of, if I share the idea, someone's going to steal it. You have to let that fear go. That's the only way, is to go to meetups and to tell people, I'm, working on this thing. That's exactly what I had to do. I had to get over the fear of sharing that I pull out my hair first, to then tell my friends in technology here, I do this thing, and this is the bracelet I want to build. Can you help me, or do you know anyone? And so you have to get over that fear, because that's the only way that your friend network or people at meetups are going to connect you to the right place. You have to have a little bit of faith that luck is going to play a role, but you have to work hard as well. Otherwise, nothing's going to happen. And another thing, like echoing Dale, don't quit that day job until you can, and try to hack and make nights and weekends lo-fi. We started with lo-fi prototypes, so we weren't sure at first, is this going to work? And I literally wore a slap bracelet with jingle bell balls around the corner, around the bracelet. We went to Michael's and just picked up a bunch of stuff, and it was arts and crafts time at home. And I wore the slap bracelet, and then I wore a very heavy bangle here. And whenever my hand went up, they jangled together. And that was enough testing for, I'm pulling again. I was alerted, and so was everyone else in my ad agency at the time. But that was enough to say, okay, this is kind of, this could work. So try to think about how you can make that tech product without using technology. If you can do that, then the tech part's easy. Then you find the team, or you learn to code. There's tons of programs out there for that, and you make it.
Grady?
Well, excuse me. These days, starting a business has become synonymous with tech, and that's just a manifestation. Entrepreneurship is fundamentally a creative exercise. You're creating something from nothing. So just as that poem that you wrote to your girlfriend who became your wife, or your boyfriend who became your husband, that creative feeling that you had that drove you to that behavior, trust that feeling you have, and then get context for it. So as Aneela mentioned, meetup.com. Mm-hmm. Between meetup.com and LinkedIn, you can change the world, right? So trust and have confidence in what you're feeling and what you're experiencing as a creative exercise, and get it in some manifestation. The bangle bracelets is a perfect analog, and hold it to yourself. Set a time that you're going to work on that idea. Write it down, as Aneela said, and then get context for what you're trying to do. Your first idea is probably not going to be where you end up. But the fact that you have that motivation, that you're being drawn on that path, you need to respect that and have confidence in it and take it where it may go.
That creative freedom is key. So Samir is our co-founder, our CEO, and also my husband. And we're not from here. So we moved here 7 years ago from New York. And in that environment, we're constantly working. But when we moved here for work, we had work-life balance. We had time for our minds to think about other things other than work. So we had that creative freedom, and I think a huge testament for this city, because HabitAware would not exist if we didn't move here. We wouldn't have had that creative moment, that creative dialogue. I'd probably still be chained to a desk somewhere. So that you need to give yourself that time to get away and to do other things while you're trying to solve a problem and create a business out of it. Go paint, go for a bike ride, get out of the elements so that you can get back and find the answer.
Well, thank you very much. This has been wonderful, and I've really enjoyed it a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. This was awesome.
My guests are Dale Cook, Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of Learn to Live. Aneela Kumar is co-founder and president of HabitAware. Grady is CEO of Nightware. I'm Chris Farrell with Minnesota Public Radio. This show is part of Call to Mind, NPR's initiative to foster new conversations about mental health with the understanding that mental health is essential to well-being for everyone. Learn more at calltomindnow.org. Now, this event would not have been possible without the work of many people. I would like to thank from Minnesota Public Radio, Sam Chu, Annie Anderson, Babette Apland, Lauren D., and Veronica Rodriguez. Also, thanks to MANOVA for hosting our broadcast. The next conversation on the creative economy will be on November 1st at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design. The topic, Art and Entrepreneurship. Tickets are available at nprnews.org/creative economy. And a last round of applause for our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to our panel, and thank you to Minnesota Public Radio. That concludes day 2 of MANOVA. Please join us at the Mayo Sports Medicine Networking event beginning now at 6th and Hennepin, right here in Minneapolis. And be back with us tomorrow for day 3 of MANOVA. Good evening and have a pleasant night.